This is your homepage. Homepage here. We'll go over every file tab on here. So first one is the setup, asking for the database. I created a new one. That's going to be this database here. It's under this name, ProTrack Pine Products. So that's under a SQL database. So it can store forever. After 6-7 years, it'll just take a little bit longer to boot up because it's going through everything. No biggie. You can always create a new one if you would like to. Other than that, I'd say to keep it. Controller settings. Controller settings here. That's what we set up as far as like the markers, any other timing thing that we have going on, the errors, the alarms, all of that. Under this controller settings tab, we can export or do a backup, or we can import a backup. So I've already created 2 for yesterday, or 1 for the settings, and then the other one for the stocks. The stocks comes in on its own because it's saved a little bit differently. It's on a different table and array, so it's gonna just save it different. I would say to back this up at least once a season and see which one fits for you better. There's some places that do like winter stocks and summer stocks, so they'll export in the winter for 1 year and import it again the winter the next year.
Okay.
But I don't know if you guys get real big seasonal changes like that. If not, no biggie. Let's go to view. View is just to pull up some shortcuts, which I have set already on there, and that's going to be for the most used items. So what we have under the most used items, before we head off, system check. You guys won't be using that. That's an integration with Comac. Static test. This one is probably the main troubleshooting item that we have on here, and we'll come back to it. But what the static test gives us is a real-time view of what the sensor is seeing itself, or actually the whole system. We're looking at what stock it's reading, photo eyes being blocked and unblocked. The delta is the actual disturbance in what it's reading in the magnetic field. The distance sensor here, making sure that when something goes over, it reads about 1 inch. That's where we want it. Temperature sensor is reading correctly. It's about 70 degrees out there. When a board passes, it changes. It'll read it either colder or hotter and make the adjustment for it. Lug input, make sure that that thing's actually firing. And then burst length, we just leave that alone. You can change the sensitivity of it from here, but you don't want to do that. Yeah, we'll come back to that. Marking a board, if you guys do want to mark a board for this test, since you guys have a paint sprayer, it's not as common on these transfers, but let's say you wanted to mark the next 10 boards. I would do 10 at NEMC, mark it. You got to be aware, somebody has to let the grader know down there that they're coming across. But other thing you can do is mark specific moisture contents. So if you want to see if this thing's marking the 20%, you can. 15, 9, 8, 7, 6, whatever the case might be. You would just highlight it, specify it, and then go ahead and mark it. It'll show you the list up here as everything's coming down via ID and sort and everything else. You can print that, take it down to the QC guy. QC guy will verify what he has on there. Counters, so this lets you know once you guys start typing in packages, it'll let you know what's in there and what needs to be brought in. So in case you guys aren't set up with the other software for data link, which will do it automatically for you, just pull and update the database every 5 minutes. In this case, you guys are gonna have to do it manually, and we're getting there pretty quick. Errors. The alarms are disabled because they're not going anywhere. I disabled them too because it could start making the system act a little bit erratic. But if you guys do decide, we have 2 alarms for various outputs. So you have way more options on what can trigger the alarm, but you only have 2 alarms. And we'll go over that as well. What you're looking for primarily here is, sensors being blocked. That would indicate that they're dirty. Well, I guess you could test the I/O. If I wanted to test the I/O, this is what I was doing yesterday with the marker. So I would just go to wet marker and start clicking it, and it'll fire it. If I wanted to verify my alarms, my outputs, I could just start clicking them here, and it's going to fire off the I/O. stock. This is for winter sawmill stock, so you won't need that. Event log, if I wanted to start recording what's going on with the system, I could just set it up, hit record, it'll send me all the errors, everything that's going on with it. Timing screen, this one's pretty big. This one we have yet to test. We tested it with the 2x10 and it looked okay. What we're looking at here, I've configured it and it's configurable over here with what you want to look at. I set up the painter spray, the in-feed photo out, your two sensors, lug input, tick count. What you're looking at is the lug pulse on this first one and then the board that came before it. So once it reads the board, it holds the information until it fires from the lug. What I was looking at earlier was to make sure that the painter was firing with the lug, and it was. Now, two things to consider. In the software, it's going to show that the sprayer is with the lug back here, but physically on the line, it's actually right underneath the board when it fires, and that's why we're catching that edge of it. If anything, if you guys decide and you guys want it in a different spot, you're left with just moving the paint sprayer to the other side of that beam and then maybe delaying the time a little bit. But for now, if that's where it's at, that's where it's at. You saw me come up here to pause it. It'll generally just keep running like this. You'll see this pause screen here and on the live monitor screen as well. Really helpful, specifically for troubleshooting. On the 2x10s, what I'm gonna ask you to take a look at and just get with USNR. We got it, but it was super close to that lug pulse. So maybe he can either shorten the lug pulse or see first if it's gonna work fine. If it works fine, we can just leave it. Right now it's in the middle between the two lugs. I think it's gonna do fine, but probably could center it just a bit more. So that's something to look out for. If this lug pulse is firing mid-range on the lug, then we didn't read the whole board before we got the information. So that might, trigger a board that might be off as far as what the moisture content really is. So that's something to look at next go around on the 2x10s.
Can you remote into this if we ever have trouble?
Yes, TeamViewer is on. If anything, I don't know if it was originally set up with a password. If it was with our generic password, it's just one password too. We just keep it like that so that we can have access for the first week or two, and then the site usually changes it. But TeamViewer is huge. I put it on my phone, my tablet. It's accessible anywhere. The next item you're probably going to run into a lot up here is going to be set points. So set points is going to allow you to change the markers when it calls it wet, when it calls it dry, how that's going to trigger, when it's going to trigger. This medium wet marker, this marker 2 to marker 3, I just put it at 22.5 to 23. Nobody really cares about the medium wets unless you have that many sprayers on there. You might later, as you guys start really fine tuning it with the kiln mapping software. The offset here, this is big. If you guys see that it's reading pretty accurate in the sense that it's staying consistently off by a percentage point up or down. So if we were to do a trending line and we were consistently underneath by 1 point, then you would come up here and just subtract 1 point from it, and that would put us right on. It goes the other way around too. You would add if you had to. And that's your target. So that's this little target icon, set points. Change the offset just to get it a little bit closer if you have to. Distance calibration, it's already been calibrated. You usually have to do this once a month, but this is something we'll do down at the controller. It'll make it a lot easier. Runs, if you wanted to change the stock when you guys are changing over from stock up here, that's where you would do it, right under runs. You would change it from 2x8, 2x6, 2x4, 2x10. Those are the options you have in there. So that gets through the shortcuts, which you'll be using the most, or some of the items you'll be using most. Let's continue on. That was under the view tab. Live data is your monitor. That's already there. You have a couple of different timing screens on here. Up here, the top portion of this updates every 200 milliseconds, which is enough time on how it's running If you guys start speeding it up every now and then, you'll see a board skip here. The controller knows it's there, but this viewer or this software sometimes has a delay on it. You can see up to 250 boards. This will just run through those. If you guys ever get the other software, it'll store every board that you guys are running through. In this case right now, all you're gonna have is run information. Bottom half of this updates every 5 seconds. This is your current tally. So right now we're telling it to look at all the stocks because this is the same system we use for the Sawmill side. Sawmill will run various stocks at various times. In this case, we leave it on all. We're telling it it's 2x8. The average right now is 16.1. Standard deviation of 4.6. And it's reading 9,575. But in 5 seconds, it's gonna read more and just update and update every 5 seconds. You have 154 invalid out of these 10,000. That just means it didn't have enough data to come up with a proper moisture content for it. So just throw it as an invalid instead of giving you something that's wrong.
Does it spray the invalids or just?
No, it lets them go through. It's generally dry boards that it was just too dry that it didn't read it correctly. I did set down your target at about 2%, so it's really was going to be bone dry, or it was warped and didn't get a good reading on it. The graph that it's on right now is going to be the histogram. It gives you a good color indicator on bone dry, good, and then wet. And those are set by your marker points. So if you wanted this to scoot out, you could, or scoot down, you could as well. Your other options here is going to be a table, which will let you know how many boards at a particular moisture content. So 68 boards at 7, 606 at 11, and so on. Third tab on here is going to be the run information. Run information just breaks everything down percentage-wise, so it gives you actual numbers instead of just a colored histogram like on the first tab.
Yeah.
Lets you know what's wet. Medium's just going to be zeroed out because we pretty much zeroed it out. But it'll let you know 87.3 was good, 8.6% on the wet side, 4.2 is bone dry. So these again are configurable by the set point. Last board just indicates what the last thing was on there. Under the graph though, if you did want to, all your information is here too. If you go over the column, it'll give you what the percentage number is and how many of those boards work. So for instance, right there, the 16% or 814 boards. At 17, 718, and so on. Other items, other things you can do here on your live screen, what we went over with the kilns will be your sample. The sample will give you a snapshot of what's going on in here. So if I saw a particular package go through that I wanted to check on that particular package what's going on with it, I would go to sample, I would clear the sample, and now what it's going to do is just start recording from that time I hit clear. So it does that every 5 seconds, like we were saying. In this case, it just got the one because the line stopped here. But it'll just continue to run until I want a snapshot of it. So it'll continue to go until I clear it and start another one. If I wanted to go ahead and print that out, I can go over here to the right and create a snapshot report. If I were to click that, it gives me the report. And now, just to track that particular package, if I wanted to, I could use that. Without the ProTrack software, this is just how you can utilize what we have here for your benefit. This can be exported via Excel, PDF, or Word. It can also be printed out. I don't know if they'll network that printer or not.
I think
but
we're
you
going to buy
can
a new
print
one
it.
for it.
Okay. And it gives you some of the basic information that you'll see on your other runs as well. 19.5% is the average for those 5 boards or whatever it was, or 13 pieces. That can also be done under the current tab if I wanted a snapshot of everything that's in here. Let that update, create this report, current tally, and there it is. So if you get a certain half or a certain run that's in there and you want to check it out, that's a way you can utilize it. This other bar here was just to configure the histogram. I put the max at 40. We don't generally see anything over 40% at the planer. So
Well, our reader only goes up to 32.
yeah, that's realistically it. The frequency that's on the handheld and the frequency that we use are less accurate after 25. So I'm glad you guys brought it down, because 25, trying to be accurate after 23 is difficult. Once we get to that wet mark, we can let you know it's wet and it's difficult to be accurate there.
We'll probably drop it from 23 down a little more too.
As it starts
More than
tightening up,
likely.
yeah.
If we start getting mold out there, I know we will.
Okay. So that's your live monitor screen. That's going to be on here quite a bit, and that's how you can utilize that.
Will that graph reset when they change the 2 by 10s?
Yeah, it'll reset, and what it's going to do is hold that in place. So I'm glad you asked that, because that'll take us to the next spot. It'll take all this information for 2x8, store it in the controller, and what you have to do under this report tab is update the database. Right now there shouldn't be anything in there because we just changed it over yesterday, and yesterday had some garbage data in there, so I deleted it. So once you update it, it'll let you know that it's updated, and then you can go to runs and pull it up. So this is all just garbage from that's initially in there, but that's how it would look if it had a better. Assuming this is it. So this was the actual only true report we had in there, and it's going to look just like that snapshot report. So it'll give you all the info, when it started, when it stopped, species, stock, everything else that you would want on there, and that would be reported on the. Which you can do. The only other thing is like highlight certain things. Like if I wanted to pick just all my 2x10s, I could do something like that. In this case, it's not going to help because like I was saying, it's all garbage. Should delete it actually.
So if you select like all the 2 by 10s like that, it combines them.
It'll combine it into one report. So if you wanted to see what your quarter was, or last 30 days, 60 days, you can just go through the sheets and set that up. Change how many are on there, because once it starts getting bigger, it's going to be a little more difficult. So right now it would only show 50, but you can up that to 100. Other tools, pretty much those shortcuts that we had on here. You can log some diagnostics. So if I wanted to set a debug on here, I could. What you would do is just kind of report, start doing stuff on here. It's going to let me know and record that, and then I can just save it to a file. At that point, you would be able to email it to me so that you can troubleshoot. Turn that off. It's not recording. Setup. A couple of things on here. Starting with the network. The controller's IP address is this one. This is down there. We'll go over how the IP is set. So 192.168.1.203. What I had to do was designate an IP on this NIC card that it's talking to. As a note, it's going to be the same Cat5. It's a black Cat5 that's down there all the way up here. So the NIC card that it's in right now is the NIC card it wants to stay on, because I did a static IP on there. I think the static IP here was like 201 for the last 3, and down there is 203. You can set several systems on one software if you guys end up doing more, but I doubt that. Next one there, probably one of the more important ones is going to be these two, but we'll go to general settings first. General settings, number of stocks, I have 4 of them set for you guys, all your 2-inch from 4 to 10. To read from 2% up to 99%. I did put a reading delay on there, so I put a reading delay of 2. It was maxing out on the boards, and I don't know where it was maxing out. So on a 2x8 that's on there now, it was maxing out. It'll take 27 readings, but I don't know at what point it stopped. So what I did was I delayed it, and now it's at 20 readings across the whole board. So I would rather get the whole board with just a few than a bunch at the beginning, because I don't know what would happen back here. Just an FYI, normally on a 2x4 with a speed of like 180 to 200, something like that, we're only getting 3 or 4 readings, and that's sufficient to be accurate. So 17 to 19 right now is really good. We can set it here. If I wanted to just use the peak moisture content, I would click on this, and that's what it would use to spray. So if you guys ever decide that you do want to change it over to use peak instead of average, this is where it'll be. Under general sensor settings, so under the setup, under general settings, first tab, use peak. Other items in here, hardware, we really don't have anything else tied into it. The keypad, when it does, we'll be using this this manually here, so the guys can set the keypad up in many different ways. You can do a length entry, charge entry, extra bundles in a queue, things like that.
He was talking about doing it yesterday.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the next step. If you guys really like this system and gain confidence in it, the next go around is really going to help. You can set the polarity on your alarms if you guys do set up the alarms. Bundles, you can auto increment, so if you have a bunch of them stacked up there, you can type in and leave them in the queue, and it'll automatically count down the bundle and then start the next one. Reports, if you want to log the link, things like that. Weight system you guys aren't on. Serial output, later on down the line, if you guys do get a grader or something, we will send this serial output, and you can change board ID, add the temperature, and give it a precise measurement. Other item is going to be stock. So this one is why we're here. The items on this, it shows you your 4 stocks. It has these factor tabs, which are just part of what we use in the algorithm to come up with the moisture. What you guys will be using is the offset and the slope adjust. So we'll click on the one we're on now, just to get a little more information. The basic info, it's a 2x8 Southern Yellow Pine. The thickness, the width, the length is just generally set at 8 feet for all of them. You can set the pieces per tier and the number of tiers. So once you find out what the bundle package is for a 2x8, you can set it here if you're going to be doing auto increments. The model, so this goes back to the moisture model. The equation factors, just leave those alone. What you'll be working with is the adjustments on the offset and the slope adjust. Low slope factor is to try to get you more accurate if you're one of the mills that tries to read between 1% and 8%. There's a lot of people that, or there are some mills that use that export wood, and they really want to be accurate on that low end. If you guys aren't doing that, that's great. Just you work on offset and slope adjust. So offset's going to be a direct change, a universal change, taking all the stocks up or down depending on what it's reading. The slope adjust is actually going to give you that, I don't want to call it a curve, but it's going to set you on that slope to know what it's going to call wet, when it's going to call it wet. It's a different kind of trend line, and I could show you on a different graph what that looks like. Reading exclusions, we're eliminating the first one and the last one because those tend to be super dry anyway. As soon as it reads the edge of the board, it's going to start taking that reading, but we're going to eliminate it because it's going to be too dry to really give you a good accurate count. You can set some gain factors, but I would kind of stay away from that until you start gaining a lot of data for it, or gathering a lot of data. Paint markers, same thing as your set points. This is pretty much a set point screen. The set point up here is the shortcut for all of this. Everything else on here, remote separation. If you guys do set up a keypad, I can let it know when it's going to separate and start counting the next one. Weight system, it's for the sawmill. So that's what those look like. We'll get more in depth on the slope and offset for here and for here on an Excel sheet that I have. Wayne did make a copy, so he has a copy of the Excel sheet to keep for you guys on the site. Temperature sensor is up and running, so leave that alone. There's no setup there. Moisture sensors, I turned the other 3 off. If you guys ever have to eliminate one of these 2, you can. You just check them off. Same thing here, you can put an offset on them if you see that it's reading too dry or too wet. And you can also set a gain on it if you feel that that's better. This will be a universal setting as well, meaning you can't just specify, well, pad number 1 is always reading dry when it's on 2x4s. You're just going to have to set it on the 2x4. If you do it here, it's going to be a universal setting. Distance sensors, again, it's just a shortcut to do the calibration. Paint marker. So we were working with trying to set the delays on this. The only differences I made, and it's really marker 4, but just to be safe, I was using marker 3 as well. What I did was I turned the on time on so that it'll give you more of a spray, so that it's more visible. Right. It is on the end of the board, so really anything after 13, I was noticing that it was shooting up into the air because the board had already passed. So 13 seems to be the limit. If you were to change it over to the other side of the beam, You can up that because we're going to catch the front of the board, but you would have to set a delay time on it as well. The clock on this runs every 16 milliseconds, so you would just have to go out there, put one on, see what it does, see how it fits, but that's where you would set them. The test that we were doing yesterday when we had that on there, what we were doing was I would set it, but I dropped my marker point to call everything wet so that we can see where it was at. So you may have to do something similar. I tried full lug, but no, it started spraying everywhere. It fills up most of the lug, but that was just too much spraying. Too much paint going everywhere. In this case, we'll leave it as is. If it's working out good right now, we'll leave it. Next thing under setup is going to be the alarms. They're all disabled. I unchecked all of them, but you can go ahead and check these and set which output. You only have 2 outputs, so that's what I was saying. You can put all of your blocked. So block this group on alarm 1 or 2, and you can put your others on, alarm 1 if you would like, but you'll have to configure those. Meaning, if the alarm goes off, you'd have to come and check, well, which one is it? But at least if they're grouped as blocked and blocked, it's a quick indicator to go ahead and clean everything off. The in-feed photo eye happens to be the one that gets blocked the most because it's away from the system and people forget to clean it. So that's something you want to be aware of.
Just want to burn the rolls.
Right. Auto shift. I spoke with Neil briefly yesterday. What we could do here is take a report at the end of the shift automatically. If you ever wanted to split this up into like a midday report, you can set this at the morning half and then set this at the afternoon half. But I think right now they just want to do runs. So that's actually through the setup. Windows just changes how the icons look. If I wanted to check for updates, we could. Release notes just lets you know what happened on that update. So that's your brief intro. The other items on here, I'll go ahead and pause this, is this background time. I don't have any boards in there. The background time, what it's going to do is take a reference, a 0 reference at any point. So I compare it to a scale. The scale always has to 0 out. Our 2 scales out there, if they get dust and chips and maybe even moisture that are on it, you want it to 0 out so it doesn't take that into account to the board that's passing. You should see a background time change here within the last hour and a half at least. I've been monitoring it, and since yesterday you guys have been doing it like every 20 minutes, so that's good to see. How it knows to take a background time is through the system. It'll check if there's a difference in temperature or a difference in the delta. The delta meaning when it zeroes out, when it goes to empty, like are these changing? So you see how this one's at -11? Yeah. Once the chains start running and doing that, it's going to take another background once it sees the board. If at any point you want to just force a 0 on it, you can just force one here. Now, if you force it and there's something on it, now it's going to be reading that differently. So you want to be careful with that when you do it. So we'll just wait for boards to pass and see what be the comparison sheet. So we do need some information on here. All the steps are up here on the top left. What we're trying to do here is compare the handheld data versus our data so that they can correlate and we can match up to the handheld. The handheld, we always just assume that you guys have had it calibrated, and that's what the QC guys or SPIB is using to, match their stuff.
Sure.
So what we have on here, the information we need is going to be the current slope and the current bias of the stock that you're going to try to calibrate to. This was yesterday's 2x8, so it was currently at 125, and it had a slope of 2% on the positive side. We had some data. We took 10 board sample before we ran them through. 11.1 to 9.2, 13.4 to 14.2, 14.9 to 15. So in this case, it was already accurate and already on. But let's say, for instance, that it wasn't. Let's say that this was reading something off, and let's say this was reading off as well. you can see that the slope line here is off where it should be mathematically for it to match. What you would start doing is start turning the slope. In this case, it wants to go down, so I'm gonna bring the number down. So let's say it just goes to 100. You can see it did flatten out, but now it's on the bottom side of it. So I would have to bring it up with the offset. Well, anyway, that's the gist. That's how you would start getting it to match up correctly. And just get it to work that way. One of the other things though to keep in mind, I'm gonna go ahead and undo those. There's a difference column down here. I would say to take a look at this before you start doing that. So there are a couple of outliers that you can get rid of. In this case, let's say I got rid of, and it's not really an outlier, but in this particular set of data it is, getting rid of the difference of here because it was a difference of 2. Is that first column. Underneath that, there's another one at 1.5, which I'm assuming is this one here. If I got rid of those, it would be even more accurate. But let's say I had a column of 30 boards and there was 4 of them that were completely out of whack. Get rid of the outliers so that you can use good data to make your line. Because those outliers will really start throwing things off. So with this data, without getting rid of anything, it was on. But let's say we had something, you know, way off. You can see that it's gonna start throwing it off into different directions. So you want to get rid of those before you start making any kind of changes. And also just looking at the differences in here, because sometimes it could just take an offset to change it. If in this case they were all within 1, I don't have a problem. But let's say they all said minus 1.9, minus 1.5, minus 1.2, minus 1.9, then you know that somewhere between 1.2 and 1.9, if you just bring the offset up, they would all be within point something. So definitely something to take a look at would be the difference before you start making that adjustment. When you do start wanting to make an adjustment, get rid of the outliers. Once you get rid of the outliers, then start playing with the slope and the bias. That's all I got for you.